Eleanor Dawson's blue eyes scanned the horizon as she tightened her grip on the porch railing, watching dust clouds rise from the approaching riders. She had endured 3 long years running her father's ranch alone in Oro Grande, New Mexico territory, and each day seemed determined to break her in new ways. But Eleanor wasn't one for breaking, no matter how many times the town whispered she wouldn't last another season. The year was 1878, and the world had little patience for a woman who spoke rarely but worked tirelessly. Eleanor preferred action to words, which made her an anomaly in a place where men boasted loudly in saloons and women gossiped on porch steps. At 24, she had already weathered more storms than most faced in a lifetime. "Miss Dawson," the call came from her ranch hand Miguel, who hurried across the yard. "Riders coming, looks like the Caldwell outfit." Eleanor nodded once, her face betraying nothing though her stomach tightened. Samuel Caldwell had been eyeing her land since her father's passing, and these visits always meant trouble. She straightened her simple cotton dress, smoothed back wisps of chestnut hair that had escaped her practical bun, and waited. 3 riders approached, the centermost one tall and broad-shouldered. Samuel Caldwell pulled his horse to a stop, dust billowing around him as he dismounted with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. His green eyes assessed her property with undisguised interest. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mr. Caldwell?" Eleanor replied with a slight nod. Her voice was soft but steady, conserving words like the precious water in her wells. "I was hoping we might discuss my offer again," Caldwell said, stepping onto the porch. At 32, he'd built the largest cattle operation in the territory through means both fair and questionable. "Land like yours shouldn't go to waste under limited management," one of his men snickered. Silent Eleanor can't even speak up for herself, let alone run a ranch. Eleanor's face remained impassive, though the barb stung. She'd heard variations of this mockery since childhood when classmates had teased her for her reserved nature. As an adult, that mockery had evolved into something more dangerous, an assumption of weakness. "My answer remains the same, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "This land is not for sale." Caldwell stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You know you can't hold out forever, Eleanor. A woman alone can't survive out here. Winter's coming, and you're 3 hands short since Pablo and the others left. Your cattle are looking thin, and that north fence line won't last another month." His observations were painfully accurate, but Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. Her silence wasn't vacancy, it was careful assessment. She knew exactly how precarious her situation was. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly, "but I'll manage." Caldwell's pleasant expression hardened. "Stubbornness isn't strength, Eleanor, it's foolishness. My offer expires at month's end, and then we'll see how your quiet determination serves you." As the men rode away, Eleanor allowed her shoulders to slump just slightly. Miguel approached, concern etching his weathered face. "Miss Eleanor, perhaps we should consider—" "No," she interrupted gently. "This was my father's dream. It will be my legacy." She turned toward the barn. "Let's fix that north fence line." 3 days later, Eleanor drove her wagon into Oro Grande, a small but growing settlement nestled in the rocky terrain of New Mexico. The main street bustled with activity, miners returning from the nearby copper mines, merchants hawking wares, and the usual crowd outside Donovan's saloon. As she guided her horses to Whitaker's general store, she was aware of the glances and whispers. To most of the townsfolk, she was an oddity, the silent woman stubbornly clinging to a failing ranch. Few understood that her quietness wasn't a deficit but a choice, born from years of finding her words twisted or dismissed. "Eleanor Dawson, as I live and breathe," Martha Whitaker exclaimed as Eleanor entered the store. "Haven't seen you in nearly 2 weeks." "Beginning to wonder if those coyotes got you," Eleanor offered a small smile. "Just busy, Mrs. Whitaker." "Busy and tight-lipped as ever," the older woman replied, but her eyes were kind. "What do you need today, dear?" Eleanor handed over her list of supplies: flour, coffee, ammunition, nails, and medicine for Miguel's cough. As Mrs. Whittaker gathered the items, Eleanor became aware of laughter from the corner of the store. "There she is, silent Eleanor," came a woman's voice, deliberately loud enough to carry. Judith Parker, the banker's wife, stood with two other ladies from town. "I heard Caldwell offered her a fortune for that dying ranch, and she turned him down, too proud to admit she can't handle a man's work. Or too simple to know better," another woman added. "My husband says she barely speaks 2 words when addressed directly, probably afraid to show how little she knows." Eleanor kept her eyes on the counter, counting out coins for her purchases. Their words were nothing new, she'd heard variations her whole life. As a child, teachers had mistaken her quietness for slowness until her perfect exam papers proved otherwise. As a young woman, suitors had quickly lost interest when she wouldn't engage in empty chatter or simpering flattery. "That'll be $4.72, dear Mrs. Whittaker said, her voice raised slightly as if to drown out the gossip. She leaned closer. "Don't mind them, empty vessels make the most noise." Eleanor nodded gratefully and gathered her packages. As she turned to leave, the batwing doors of the store swung open, and a tall figure blocked the light. The stranger who entered was trail-worn but carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to difficult terrain. Dust clung to his denim pants and blue shirt, and his dark hat shadowed eyes that surveyed the room with quiet alertness. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Ladies," he greeted, nodding to the room at large. His voice was deep and pleasantly rough, like water over stones. "I'm looking for Sheriff Mills." "Down at the jailhouse, most likely," Mrs. Whittaker responded. "You must be the new deputy we've been expecting. Marshall sent word you'd be arriving." "That's right." "Deputy Daniel Lowell," he confirmed, removing his hat to reveal thick black hair and striking blue eyes in a sun-bronzed face. He looked to be in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. Eleanor made to move past him, eager to escape the store's oppressive atmosphere. As she did, Judith Parker stepped forward. "Deputy Lowell, welcome to Oro Grande. I'm Judith Parker, the banker's wife. You must join us for dinner soon. I'm sure you'll want to know who's who in our little community." She gestured dismissively toward Eleanor. "That's Eleanor Dawson. Don't mind her silence, she's simple that way, trying to run her father's ranch all alone, poor thing." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that defending herself only provided more fodder for gossip. Deputy Lowell's gaze shifted to Eleanor, his eyes traveling from her practical boots to her simple dress to her face. What surprised her was the lack of dismissal in his assessment. Instead, his eyes reflected something like recognition. "Miss Dawson," he said with a nod that carried unexpected respect. "Pleasure to meet you." Eleanor returned the nod but said nothing as she moved toward the door. "See what I mean," Judith Stage whispered. "Can barely acknowledge a greeting. It's a wonder she manages to feed herself, let alone run a ranch." Eleanor had her hand on the door when the deputy's voice rang out, clear and firm. "Where I come from, Mrs. Parker, a person isn't measured by how many words they speak, but by what they manage to do despite the obstacles before them." His tone was pleasant but left no room for argument. "And from what I hear, Miss Dawson has kept her ranch running through drought and rustlers for 3 years on her own." "That suggests she's anything but simple." The store fell silent. Eleanor paused, her back still to the room, unsure how to respond to this unexpected defense. "Well," Judith huffed, "you're new here, deputy. You'll learn soon enough." Eleanor pushed through the door and hurried to her wagon, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. She was loading her supplies when boots crunched on the wooden sidewalk behind her. "Miss Dawson," came the deputy's voice, "allow me to help with those bags." Eleanor turned to find Daniel Lowell standing there, hat in hand. Up close, she noticed a thin scar that ran along his jaw and the weathered quality of his skin that spoke of years under open skies. "Thank you, deputy, but I can manage," she replied quietly. "I don't doubt that for a second," he said, and there was something in his tone, not condescension or pity, but genuine acknowledgement that made her look up and truly meet his gaze. "Why did you speak up for me in there?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Deputy Lowell regarded her for a moment. Because I recognize strength when I see it, Miss Dawson, and it doesn't always come wrapped in noise. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stir within her, not quite trust, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, replaced his hat, and helped load the last of her supplies despite her protests. As she climbed onto the wagon's seat, he stepped back. "Be careful on the trail back," he said. "There's been reports of trouble near Copper Canyon." Eleanor gathered the reins. "I always am, Deputy." As she drove away, she couldn't help but glance back once. Daniel Lowell stood watching her go, a solitary figure against the dusty street of Oro Grande. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the strange sensation that someone had truly seen her. The next 2 weeks brought unseasonable rain to the territory, turning dusty trails to mud and swelling creeks beyond their banks. Eleanor worked from dawn till dusk repairing weather damage, moving cattle to higher ground, and reinforcing the barn roof that threatened to leak. Miguel's cough had worsened, leaving her to handle most chores alone. By the time the skies cleared, Eleanor was bone-tired but satisfied with their progress. The ranch looked better than it had in months. The north fence line was sturdy, the cattle were healthy, and she'd even managed to repair the windmill that had been inoperable since spring. She was in the corral breaking a new Mustang when hoofbeats approached from the main road. Expecting Samuel Caldwell or his men, she was surprised to see Deputy Lowell riding toward the house. The stallion she was working with tossed his head nervously at the newcomer, and Eleanor soothed him with gentle words and a firm hand. The deputy dismounted and approached the corral fence, keeping a respectful distance from the skittish horse. "Miss Dawson," he called. "Sorry to intrude." Eleanor led the Mustang to the far side of the corral before walking over to the deputy. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and her shirt and trousers were dusty from work. She was acutely aware of how she must look compared to the town women with their neat dresses and carefully arranged curls. "Deputy," she acknowledged, "what brings you out this way?" "Sheriff asked me to ride the outlying properties after the rains, check for any trouble." His eyes took in the ranch, the repaired fence line, the fresh timber on the barn roof, the newly functioning windmill. "Looks like you've been busy." Eleanor followed his gaze. "The rain gave us work, but it also gave the land what it needed." Daniel nodded, his expression appreciative. "You've accomplished a lot here. Most men couldn't have done half as much with twice the help." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Eleanor off guard. She was used to being underestimated, not acknowledged. "Thank you," she said, then hesitated before adding, "Would you like some coffee? It's fresh." Daniel smiled, the expression warming his usually serious face. "I'd be much obliged, Miss Dawson." They sat on the porch with steaming cups. Miguel had emerged from his cabin to tend the horses, giving them privacy that felt both welcome and slightly unsettling to Eleanor, who rarely entertained visitors. "How long have you been in law enforcement, Deputy?" she asked, surprising herself by initiating conversation. "Going on 10 years now," he replied. "Started as a town deputy in Kansas, then rode with the Rangers in Texas for a spell before taking assignments like this one." "And what brought you to Oro Grande specifically?" Daniel's expression sobered. "The marshal believes there's organized rustling happening in the territory. Several small ranchers have been hit hard, too hard to be random thieving. I'm here to investigate and help Sheriff Mills put a stop to it." Eleanor tensed. "We lost 12 head in the spring." "Sheriff Mills said it was likely strays or wolves." "And you didn't believe him," Daniel observed, not a question. She shook her head. "The cattle were specifically chosen young, healthy stock. No predator would have been so selective, and they wouldn't have disappeared without a trace of struggle." Daniel studied her face. "You didn't report your suspicions?" "I did," Eleanor said, a rare edge entering her quiet voice. "Sheriff suggested I had miscounted or that the hands had stolen them. He didn't take my concerns seriously." "Because you're a woman," Daniel concluded. "Because I'm a quiet woman," Eleanor corrected. "People mistake my silence for ignorance or weakness. It's easier for them that way." Daniel set down his cup. "Why are you quiet, Miss Dawson, if you don't mind my asking?" The question was personal, but his tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Eleanor considered how to answer. Few had ever bothered to ask. "Words are powerful," she finally said. "I learned early that people use them carelessly to hurt, to manipulate, to fill silence that doesn't need filling. I prefer to speak when I have something worth saying and to let my actions stand for themselves." She looked down at her calloused hands. "Unfortunately, many people see only what they expect to see." "Not everyone," Daniel replied softly. Their eyes met, and Eleanor felt that strange connection again, an understanding that required no explanation. This man somehow recognized the strength in her reserve instead of assuming weakness. The moment was broken by Miguel calling from the barn. A cow was struggling to calve and Eleanor was needed. "I should go," she said, standing. Daniel rose as well. "Of course. Thank you for the coffee, Miss Dawson." He hesitated. "If you notice anything suspicious, any signs of rustlers, you'll let me know. I'd value your observations." The request, so respectful of her knowledge and judgment, touched her deeply. "I will, Deputy." As he rode away, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar lightening her steps as she hurried to the barn, a sense that perhaps, for once, she had been truly heard. The next week brought Samuel Caldwell back to the Dawson ranch, this time with a formal written offer. The amount he proposed was substantial enough to set Eleanor up comfortably anywhere else for the rest of her life. But as she stood in her father's study reading the document, all she could see were the years of sweat and determination that had built this place. "It's more than generous," Caldwell urged, his voice smooth as polished leather. "You could move to Denver, San Francisco, anywhere you wanted, live like a lady instead of working yourself to the bone out here." Eleanor set the paper down. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate the offer, but my answer remains no." Frustration flashed across his handsome face. "This stubbornness isn't doing you any favors, Eleanor. People in town already talk about your peculiarities. Don't give them more reason." "I don't make my decisions based on town gossip," she replied evenly. "Perhaps you should," he countered. "A woman alone is vulnerable in more ways than one. My protection could be valuable." The subtle threat in his words wasn't lost on Eleanor. She straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Caldwell. I'll see you out." As they walked to the porch, Caldwell stopped and turned to face her. "I admire your determination, Eleanor, misguided though it is. That's why I've been patient, but my patience has limits, as does my generosity." He stepped closer. "This land will be part of the Caldwell ranch one way or another. It would be better for everyone if you accepted that gracefully." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Good day, Mr. Caldwell." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat on her porch with her father's old rifle across her lap, watching the moonlit landscape and considering her options. The ranch was finally starting to turn a corner. The repairs were holding, the cattle were healthy, and the small crop of hay she'd planted was thriving. With another good season, she could hire more hands and expand the herd, but Caldwell's warning echoed in her mind. He wasn't a man to accept defeat easily, and his influence in the territory was substantial. If he decided to make things difficult for her by diverting the creek that ran through his property before reaching hers, or blocking the trail she used to drive cattle to market, she would have few recourses. A noise from the barn startled her from her thoughts. Eleanor raised the rifle and moved silently across the yard, her heart pounding. The door was ajar, though she distinctly remembered latching it before sunset. She slipped inside, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. A lantern flickered from the far stall. Miguel must have come to check on the new calf. But as she rounded the corner, the breath caught in her throat. Two men were hurriedly gathering her tack and tools, stuffing them into sacks. Her prized saddle hand, tooled by her father, was already missing. "Stop right there," Eleanor commanded, raising the rifle. The men froze, then the larger one lunged toward her. Eleanor fired a warning shot into the roof beams. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, sending horses whinnying in panic and chickens fluttering from their roosts. "Next one won't miss," she said calmly, though her pulse raced. The smaller man raised his hands. Easy, lady, we're just collecting what's owed. Nothing here is owed to anyone, Eleanor replied. Drop the sacks and move outside, slowly. The larger man glanced at his companion, clearly considering his options. Eleanor kept the rifle steady. Don't be foolish, she advised. Miguel, she called out, hoping her ranch hand would hear from his cabin. The smaller thief took advantage of her momentary distraction, hurling a heavy bridle at her head. Eleanor ducked, but the movement gave the larger man the opening he needed. He charged, knocking the rifle from her hands and sending her sprawling to the dirt floor. Eleanor scrambled to her feet as the man advanced. She grabbed a pitchfork and held it before her like a spear. You got spirit, I'll give you that, the man growled. But Caldwell was right. You're in over your head, woman. Caldwell sent you. Eleanor asked, though the confirmation only validated her suspicions. Let's just say he wouldn't shed tears if you decided running a ranch was too much trouble, the man replied with an ugly smile. He lunged forward, grabbing the pitchfork handle and wrenching it sideways. Eleanor held fast, using his momentum to swing him off balance. They grappled for control, the other thief circling behind her. She knew she couldn't overpower them both, but she refused to yield without a fight. The sound of a pistol being cocked froze everyone in place. I'd reconsider your current activities, gentlemen, came a familiar voice from the barn door. Deputy Daniel Lowell stood silhouetted against the night sky, his revolver aimed steady and true. This ain't your concern, lawman, the larger thief growled, still gripping the pitchfork handle. A theft in progress in my jurisdiction is very much my concern, Daniel replied evenly. As is an assault on a lady, step away from Miss Dawson. Now, the smaller man made a sudden move toward the shadows. Daniel's pistol tracked him instantly. That would be unwise, friend. Reluctantly, both men raised their hands. Daniel moved forward, keeping his weapon trained on them as he retrieved rope from a nearby hook. Miss Dawson, if you wouldn't mind securing their hands while I keep them covered. Eleanor worked quickly, binding the thieves' wrists behind their backs with practiced efficiency. Daniel raised an eyebrow, impressed by her knotwork. Not my first time tying up troublemakers, she explained quietly, though usually they have 4 legs. The ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face before his expression hardened again as he addressed the captives. Now, which one of you wants to explain why you're stealing from Miss Dawson's property? The men exchanged glances but remained silent. They mentioned Samuel Caldwell, Eleanor offered. Implied he'd arranged this to pressure me into selling. Daniel's jaw tightened. Is that so? Well, gentlemen, theft, assault, and criminal conspiracy are serious charges in the territory. You're looking at years of hard labor. Unless you're inclined to share details that might lighten your sentence. The smaller thief shifted nervously. We don't know nothing about Caldwell. We just heard this place was easy pickings, woman living alone and all. Strange coincidence that you'd target this particular ranch, Daniel observed. Especially the same day Caldwell made an offer on the property. Miguel appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand and sleep still in his eyes. Miss Eleanor, I heard the shot. Everything's under control now, Miguel, she assured him. Deputy Lowell arrived just in time. Daniel gestured to the thieves. Miguel, could you hitch Miss Dawson's wagon? We need to transport these men to town. As Miguel hurried to comply, Daniel turned to Eleanor. His eyes searched her face. Are you hurt? No, she replied. Just angry. Daniel nodded, understanding in his gaze. We'll sort this out. If Caldwell is behind this, he won't get away with it. An hour later, the thieves were locked in the Oro Grande jail, and Sheriff Mills had been roused from his bed, much to his displeasure. He listened to Daniel's account with increasing discomfort. That's a serious accusation against a prominent citizen, Deputy, Mills said, glancing nervously at Eleanor. These drifters could be saying Caldwell's name just to cause trouble. They had specific information about Miss Dawson's meeting with Caldwell earlier today, Daniel pointed out. And this isn't the first report of pressure tactics being used against small ranchers who won't sell. The sheriff ran a hand over his thinning hair. Look, I'll question them properly in the morning, but without solid proof of Caldwell's involvement, there's not much I can do. You could start by taking the theft and assault seriously, Daniel suggested, his tone respectful but firm. Mills had the grace to look abashed. Of course we will. Those charges will stick, Miss Dawson, I assure you. He shuffled papers on his desk. It's late. You should get home before it's full dark. Outside the sheriff's office, Eleanor took a deep breath of the cool night air. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I'll escort you home, Daniel said, untethering his horse. That's not necessary, Deputy. I know the way. I don't doubt that for a moment, he replied, echoing his words from their first meeting. But those men might have friends, and I'd rest easier knowing you arrived safely. Too tired to argue, Eleanor nodded. They traveled in companionable silence for the first mile, the moon providing ample light for the trail. How did you happen to be at my barn tonight? Eleanor finally asked. Daniel glanced over. I've been patrolling the outlying properties since the rustling reports started. When I saw lantern light in your barn at that hour, I thought I should investigate. Fortunate timing, Eleanor murmured. For me as well as you, Daniel said. When she gave him a questioning look, he continued, I've been trying to piece together the pattern of thefts and intimidation in the territory. Your experience tonight confirms what I've suspected: someone is systematically targeting small ranchers who won't sell. Caldwell, Eleanor said with certainty, most likely, but proving it will be difficult. Men like him rarely dirty their own hands. They rode in silence for another stretch before Daniel spoke again. May I ask you something, Miss Dawson? You may. Why is this ranch so important to you? Important enough to risk your safety, Eleanor considered the question. Most people assumed she was simply being stubborn or foolish, but Daniel seemed to genuinely want to understand. My father came here with nothing but determination and a dream, she began softly. He built this place board by board, fence post by fence post. When others said the land was too harsh, the water too scarce, he proved them wrong through sheer persistence. She gestured to the moonlit landscape around them. He taught me that true strength isn't about physical power or loud declarations, it's about continuing when everything and everyone tells you to quit. She paused, surprised at how easily the words were flowing. When he died, many expected me to sell immediately. Some even thought it was improper for me to try to continue his work. But this land is more than property to me, it's his legacy and my home, the only place I've ever truly belonged. Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. Your quiet strength is remarkable, Miss Dawson, and much needed in a world that too often values the wrong kinds of power. His words warmed something deep within her, a part that had grown cold from years of dismissal and mockery. Thank you, Deputy, she said simply. As they approached her ranch, Daniel suddenly raised a hand, signaling her to stop. There's light in your house, he whispered. Eleanor tensed. She'd extinguished all lamps before leaving for town. Daniel drew his pistol. Stay behind me, he instructed, dismounting silently. They approached the house cautiously. Through the window, they could see a figure moving inside, rummaging through Eleanor's desk. Daniel positioned himself by the front door while motioning for Eleanor to stay back. Then, in one fluid motion, he kicked the door open and entered, weapon raised. Don't move, the intruder spun around, and Eleanor gasped as she recognized Samuel Caldwell's foreman, Jim Harker. Hands where I can see them, Harker, Daniel commanded. The foreman's face twisted with rage, but he slowly raised his hands. This is a misunderstanding, Deputy. Is that so? Because it looks like breaking and entering to me. Daniel moved forward cautiously. What are you searching for? Harker's eyes flicked to the desk drawer. Mr. Caldwell sent me to deliver a revised offer to Miss Dawson. When I found no one home, I was leaving it for her review. In a locked drawer? Daniel asked skeptically. Eleanor stepped into the house, her fear giving way to indignation. He's lying. I keep my father's deed and water rights documentation in that drawer. She fixed Harker with a steady gaze. Caldwell sent you to steal my papers, didn't he? Without them, I'd have no legal proof of ownership. Harker's expression confirmed her suspicion. That's enough for an arrest, Daniel said, removing handcuffs from his belt. Jim Harker, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted theft, and conspiracy. You're making a mistake, Harker warned as Daniel secured his wrists. Mr. Caldwell has friends in high places, the territorial governor, judges, even marshals. This won't end well for either of you. Threats won't help your situation, Daniel replied calmly. Miss Dawson, I need to take him to town immediately. Will you be all right here alone? Eleanor nodded, though her heart was racing. I'll be fine. Miguel is in the cabin nearby. Daniel hesitated. Lock your doors and keep your rifle close. I'll return as soon as I can. After they left, Eleanor did as instructed, checking every window and door before settling in her father's chair with the rifle across her lap. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was impossible. The night's events had confirmed what she'd long suspected. Caldwell was willing to go to extreme lengths to obtain her land. The question was why. Her property was valuable, but not exceptionally so. Other ranches in the territory had better water access or more fertile soil. What made her land worth such risk and effort? As dawn broke, Eleanor heard hoofbeats approaching. She moved to the window, rifle ready, and felt relief wash over her when she recognized Daniel returning. He looked tired but determined as he dismounted. Any trouble? She asked, opening the door. None, he replied. Harker's locked up with his friends from the barn. Sheriff Mills wasn't pleased to be woken a second time, but even he couldn't ignore a break-in. Eleanor set down the rifle and moved to the stove. You must be exhausted. Let me make you some coffee and breakfast. Daniel removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. I don't want to impose. It's the least I can do, Eleanor insisted, already stoking the fire. Besides, we need to talk about what happens next. Over eggs and coffee, Daniel explained the situation. Sheriff Mills sent a telegram to the territorial marshal about Harker's arrest, but Caldwell has already arrived in town, claiming Harker acted without his knowledge or consent. And people believe that? Eleanor asked incredulously. Daniel shrugged. Caldwell is respected and well-connected. Without direct evidence linking him to the thefts or intimidation, it's his word against Harker's, and Harker suddenly seems reluctant to implicate his boss. So Caldwell walks free, Eleanor concluded, her voice bitter. For now, Daniel agreed, but I'm building a case, Miss Dawson. Each incident, each testimony helps create a pattern that will eventually be impossible to ignore. Eleanor poured more coffee, her movements precise and controlled despite her inner turmoil. And in the meantime, he won't stop, Deputy. If anything, he'll be more determined now. Daniel's blue eyes met hers across the table. I know. That's why I've requested permission from Sheriff Mills to establish temporary quarters here at your ranch. Eleanor stared at him, surprised. You want to stay here, with your permission, yes. The sheriff agrees it's a sensible precaution, given the escalating nature of the threats against you. Eleanor considered the proposal. Having a lawman on her property would certainly deter further incidents, but it also meant having this man in close proximity day and night. The prospect was both reassuring and unsettling in ways she wasn't prepared to examine. Where would you stay? She asked practically. The bunkhouse would be fine if it's empty now. Eleanor nodded slowly. Very well, if you think it's necessary. I do, Daniel said firmly. And there's something else we should discuss. He hesitated. I've been studying land records and water surveys. I think I understand why Caldwell is so fixated on your property. He unfolded a map on the table between them. Your land sits at the convergence of these seasonal waterways. Most years they're unremarkable, but there are geological indications that a significant underground water source and aquifer lies beneath your southwest pasture. Eleanor leaned forward, studying the map. How would Caldwell know that? He hired surveyors from Denver last spring supposedly to assess his own property for well placement. I believe they discovered the aquifer extends beyond his land onto yours. In this territory, water is more valuable than gold, especially for someone planning to expand cattle operations on the scale Caldwell envisions. The revelation made perfect sense. Eleanor had always wondered why that particular pasture remained green even in the driest seasons. What can I do? She asked. Daniel folded the map carefully. Be vigilant, document everything, and consider filing a formal complaint with the territorial court about the harassment and attempted theft. It may not stop Caldwell immediately, but it creates an official record." Eleanor nodded, feeling more resolved than ever. "I'll do it." Daniel studied her face. "You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly, "but fear isn't a luxury I can afford right now." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, respect deepening into admiration. "Your quiet strength is what I admire most about you, Eleanor," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Others mistake it for weakness, but I see the truth." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in Eleanor's chest. No one had ever seen her the way this man seemed to. "Thank you," she whispered, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Their eyes held for a long moment, an unspoken connection forming between them. Eleanor was the first to look away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. "You should get some rest, Deputy," she said, rising to clear the dishes. "You can move your things to the bunkhouse whenever you're ready." Daniel nodded, understanding her need for space. "I'll ride back to town for my belongings and return this afternoon." He stood and placed his hat on his head. "Lock the door behind me, Eleanor, and remember you're not alone in this fight anymore." As she watched him ride away, Eleanor realized how true those words had become. For the first time in 3 years, she felt the burden of solitude lifting from her shoulders. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, Deputy Daniel Lowell had become more than an ally in her struggle against Samuel Caldwell. He had become someone she was beginning to trust, perhaps even care for. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor and Daniel settled into an unexpected rhythm of coexistence. He maintained a respectful distance, sleeping in the bunkhouse and conducting his regular patrols, but joined her for meals and assisted with ranch work when his duties allowed. To Eleanor's surprise, his presence didn't feel intrusive. Daniel seemed to understand her need for quiet and space, often working alongside her for hours with minimal conversation. When they did speak, their discussions were thoughtful and substantive about books they'd read, places they'd seen, or the complexities of territorial law. Never once did he try to fill silence with empty words or press her to be more forthcoming than was comfortable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Eleanor found herself sharing stories about her father that she had kept locked away for years. "He taught me to ride before I could properly walk," she recalled, a rare smile softening her features. "Mother was horrified, but he insisted I'd need to be at home in the saddle if I was to inherit his love of this land." Daniel listened attentively, his eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was," Eleanor agreed. "Strong but gentle, he never raised his voice, yet everyone respected his word." She traced a pattern on the wooden armrest. "I think that's why I value quiet strength so much. He showed me its power." "It suits you," Daniel observed. "Though I suspect many mistake your reserve for timidity." "Most do," Eleanor acknowledged. "It's been both a burden and a shield. People reveal much when they believe you pose no threat." Daniel studied her face. "Like Caldwell underestimating you." "Precisely." Eleanor's expression hardened. "His mistake." They lapsed into comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Daniel's presence, beside her the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to surround him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth that radiated from him in the cooling evening air. "May I ask you something personal?" She ventured, surprising herself. "Of course. What brought you to law enforcement? You seem different from most lawmen I've encountered." Daniel considered the question. "I grew up in a small farming community in Missouri. When I was 16, outlaws raided our town. They killed the sheriff and several others, including my father, who tried to protect our store." His voice remained steady, but Eleanor sensed the old pain beneath his words. "The territorial marshal who eventually tracked down those men showed me that law could be about justice, not just power. That a badge worn honorably could protect those who couldn't protect themselves." He looked down at his hands. "I decided then that's what I wanted to do with my life, "And have you found justice?" Eleanor asked softly. Daniel's gaze returned to the darkening horizon. "Sometimes, not always. But I keep trying." The simple honesty of his answer touched Eleanor deeply. This was a man who understood the value of purpose, of standing firm against forces that would overwhelm others. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. Daniel turned to her, his expression earnest in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for asking. Most people don't look beyond the badge." Their eyes held in the dim light, and Eleanor felt a now familiar flutter in her chest. There was something building between them, something beyond the alliance of circumstance that had brought them together. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Daniel was immediately alert, rising to his feet and placing a protective hand near his holstered pistol. "Are you expecting anyone?" he asked quietly. Eleanor shook her head, already moving to retrieve her rifle from inside the house. By the time she returned, the rider had entered the yard. Miguel, returning from town earlier than expected, his expression grave. "Miss Eleanor," he called, dismounting quickly. "Deputy, there's trouble coming." Daniel stepped forward. "What kind of trouble, Miguel?" "In town, they're saying Mr. Caldwell has filed a legal claim against the ranch," Miguel explained, catching his breath. "Says Miss Eleanor's father borrowed money years ago and never repaid it. He's produced papers with Mr. Dawson's signature." Eleanor felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "That's impossible. My father never borrowed from anyone, especially not Caldwell. He was meticulous about avoiding debt." "Forged documents," Daniel concluded grimly. "It's a common tactic when intimidation fails. The signature might be genuine, taken from another document and transferred to a false loan agreement." "The hearing is set for Monday," Miguel continued. "Mr. Caldwell's lawyer was posting notices all over town." Eleanor calculated quickly. "That's only 3 days from now." Daniel's expression was determined. "Then we have 3 days to find proof the documents are fraudulent." For the first time since her father's death, Eleanor felt true despair threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. If Caldwell had indeed manufactured convincing evidence, her word alone, the word of a woman considered odd and incapable by many in the community, would carry little weight with a territorial judge. Daniel seemed to read her thoughts. "We'll fight this, Eleanor," he said firmly. "Together." The certainty in his voice restored some of her courage. She straightened her shoulders and nodded once. "Yes, we will." The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. Daniel sent telegrams to contacts in other territories, seeking information on similar cases Caldwell might have been involved with. Eleanor combed through her father's meticulous records, searching for any documentation that might contradict Caldwell's claims. Miguel rode to neighboring ranches, asking discreetly if others had faced similar pressure tactics. To Eleanor's surprise, several had, though most had eventually sold to Caldwell rather than fight. On the eve of the hearing, Daniel returned from town with news. "I've learned something interesting," he said as they gathered around the kitchen table. "The judge assigned to your case, Judge Wilson, has a financial interest in the new railroad spur being built from Santa Fe. Guess who else is a major investor?" "Caldwell," Eleanor concluded. Daniel nodded. "The conflict of interest is clear, but challenging a judge's impartiality is risky without solid evidence." Eleanor rubbed her temples. "So even the legal system is aligned against me." "Not entirely," Daniel countered. "I've also discovered that Caldwell's previous land acquisitions have followed a pattern: all properties with suspected water sources, all obtained through questionable means. The marshal is interested in the bigger picture, especially if water rights are being monopolized." He reached across the table and, in an unprecedented gesture, covered her hand with his. "Don't lose hope, Eleanor. Sometimes the quietest strength is the most enduring." The warmth of his touch and the faith in his eyes renewed her determination. "You're right," she said softly. "My father didn't build this ranch by giving up at the first obstacle. Neither will I." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, reviewing their strategy for the hearing. They had assembled what evidence they could: her father's ledgers showing no debt, testimonials from neighbors about Caldwell's aggressive tactics, documentation of the recent criminal incidents at the ranch. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Eleanor," Daniel's voice came through the wood. "I saw your light. May I speak with you?" She opened the door to find him fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression both troubled and resolute. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "I've been thinking about tomorrow's hearing," he said. "There's something I haven't told you, something that might help but also puts you at risk." Eleanor stepped back, inviting him into her sitting room. "Tell me." Daniel paced the small space, choosing his words carefully. 6 months ago, I was assigned to investigate water rights disputes in Arizona territory. We discovered a syndicate of wealthy ranchers and businessmen systematically acquiring control of water sources through intimidation, fraud, and occasionally violence. "And Caldwell is part of this syndicate," Eleanor guessed. Daniel nodded. "We believe so, though we haven't had enough evidence to move against him directly. The marshal has been building a case carefully, gathering testimony and documentation from across the territories." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Eleanor asked, her voice even despite the surge of emotions his revelation provoked. Daniel stopped pacing to face her directly. "Because knowing it puts you in danger. These men don't hesitate to eliminate threats to their operations. And now I believe you deserve to know everything, especially since tomorrow may be your last chance to save your ranch." His blue eyes were intense in the lamplight. "If you're willing to publicly link Caldwell to the syndicate during the hearing, it might force Judge Wilson to recuse himself rather than risk being implicated. But it would also make you an open target." Eleanor absorbed this information in silence, weighing the implications. "You're asking me to risk my life to save my land. I'm asking you to consider it," Daniel corrected, "and to know that if you do, I'll do everything in my power to protect you." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Eleanor studied his face, the strength in his jaw, the honesty in his eyes, the concern etched in the furrow of his brow. In the weeks since he'd arrived, this man had demonstrated a respect and understanding she'd rarely encountered. He had seen her strength when others saw only strangeness, valued her quietness when others demanded she change. In that moment, Eleanor recognized that her feelings for Daniel had grown beyond gratitude or admiration. Whether she'd intended it or not, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't allowed anyone to be since her father's death. "I'll do it," she said finally, "not just for the ranch, but because it's right. These men shouldn't be allowed to take what isn't theirs, whether it's my land or the territory's water." Relief and admiration flooded Daniel's expression. "I knew you would say that, did you?" she asked, a rare smile touching her lips. "Yes," he said simply. "Because your quiet strength has never been about avoiding conflict, it's about choosing your battles wisely and then standing firm when it matters most." The certainty with which he spoke the depth of his understanding moved something profound within Eleanor. Without conscious thought, she stepped closer to him, closing the distance that propriety had maintained between them. Daniel remained still, his eyes never leaving hers, as she slowly raised her hand to touch his face. The gesture was tentative, questioning, unlike any she had made before. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a question and a prayer. "You see me," she whispered. "No one has ever truly seen me before." His hand came up to cover hers against his cheek. "From the first moment," he confirmed, "your quiet strength is what I admire most about you, Eleanor." He hesitated, then continued with soft certainty. "What I love most about you." The word hung between them, changing everything and nothing at once. It merely named what had been growing between them since that first defense in the general store. Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the profound relief of being known, truly known, by another soul. "I don't have the right words," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "You don't need them," Daniel assured her. "Not with me." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, respectful, yet filled with a promise that made Eleanor's heart race. When he drew back, the question in his eyes was clear. Eleanor answered by rising on her toes to reclaim his lips with newfound certainty. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, expressing all the words that remained unspoken between them. When they finally parted, both somewhat breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together," he promised. Eleanor nodded, feeling stronger and more certain than she had in years. "Together," she agreed. The territorial courthouse in Oro Grande was packed the following morning. Word of the dispute between Eleanor Dawson and Samuel Caldwell had spread throughout the county, drawing spectators eager to witness the confrontation. Eleanor sat at a small table with Daniel beside her, his presence both official and personal. Across the aisle, Caldwell and his lawyer projected confidence, occasionally exchanging smug glances that suggested they considered the outcome a foregone conclusion. When Judge Wilson entered, the room fell silent. He was a portly man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for efficiency that sometimes came at the expense of thoroughness. Case number 47, Caldwell versus Dawson, regarding unpaid debt and property lien, the clerk announced. The judge adjusted his spectacles. "Let's proceed efficiently, gentleman and lady," he added with a perfunctory nod toward Eleanor. "Mr. Caldwell's complaint first." Caldwell's lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. In 1873, Jacob Dawson borrowed the sum of $5,000 from my client for ranch improvements. The loan agreement specified repayment within 5 years with interest. Mr. Dawson's untimely death in 1875 left the debt unpaid, and his daughter has refused to acknowledge the obligation despite multiple attempts by my client to resolve the matter amicably." He presented the document in question, a loan agreement bearing what appeared to be Jacob Dawson's signature. The judge examined it briefly. "Miss Dawson, do you contest the validity of this agreement?" Judge Wilson asked, his tone suggesting he found the proceedings tiresome. Eleanor rose, her posture straight and dignified despite the whispers that rustled through the courtroom. "I do, Your Honor. My father never borrowed money from Mr. Caldwell or anyone else. That document is a forgery," Caldwell's lawyer scoffed. "A serious accusation, Your Honor, with no evidence to support it. The signature has been verified by experts." Judge Wilson frowned. "Do you have evidence to support your claim of forgery, Miss Dawson?" This was the moment they had prepared for. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I do, Your Honor. First, my father's business records, which I've brought today, show no such loan or related improvements." She placed the ledgers on the judge's bench. "Second, I have affidavits from neighboring ranchers who have experienced similar fraudulent claims from Mr. Caldwell as part of a systematic attempt to acquire properties overlying water sources." She presented the sworn statements they had gathered. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Caldwell's face darkened as he leaned to whisper urgently to his lawyer. Judge Wilson appeared unsettled for the first time. "These are serious accusations, Miss Dawson." "There's more, Your Honor," Eleanor continued, her quiet voice somehow filling the room. "I believe Mr. Caldwell's actions are part of a larger conspiracy being investigated by the territorial marshal, a syndicate illegally monopolizing water rights across multiple territories." The courtroom erupted in shocked conversations. Judge Wilson banged his gavel for order, his face flushing. "This is outrageous, Your Honor," Caldwell's lawyer protested. "Miss Dawson is attempting to distract from the simple fact that she owes a legitimate debt. Is there substance to these allegations about a larger investigation?" Judge Wilson asked, directing his question to Daniel, who now stood beside Eleanor. "There is, Your Honor," Daniel confirmed formally. "As a deputy marshal, I can verify that such an investigation exists and that Mr. Caldwell's name has arisen in connection with it." The judge appeared deeply troubled, glancing between Caldwell and Daniel. Eleanor could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing his financial interests against the risk of being associated with a federal investigation. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice firm but respectful, "I would also like to note that the loan agreement in question is dated June 15, 1873. My father's ledger shows he was in Santa Fe that entire week for the territorial livestock auction. There are multiple witnesses who can confirm his presence there, making it impossible for him to have signed this document in Oro Grande as it claims. This concrete detail seemed to tip the scales. Judge Wilson studied the ledger entries, then the loan agreement, his frown deepening. In light of these discrepancies and the broader concerns raised, I am inclined to rule that insufficient evidence exists to support Mr. Caldwell's claim, the judge announced. The case is dismissed without prejudice, pending further investigation of the document's authenticity. Relief flooded through Eleanor, though she maintained her composed exterior. Caldwell, however, was less restrained. He rose abruptly, his face contorted with rage. "This is an outrage. That land should be mine," he shouted, momentarily forgetting the public setting in his fury. The outburst confirmed every suspicion. Judge Wilson banged his gavel. "Control your client, counselor, or I'll hold him in contempt." As Caldwell was hustled from the courtroom by his lawyer, his venomous gaze fixed on Eleanor and Daniel. "This isn't over," he hissed as he passed their table. Daniel moved protectively closer to Eleanor. "No, it isn't," he agreed quietly, "but not in the way you think." Outside the courthouse, townspeople gathered around Eleanor, many offering congratulations or apologizing for doubting her. The same women who had mocked her quietness now praised her courage. Eleanor accepted their words with grace but felt the irony keenly. "Quite a performance in there," Sheriff Mills commented, approaching them as the crowd dispersed. "Though you might have warned me about revealing an ongoing federal investigation, Deputy." "Necessary risk," Daniel replied unapologetically. Mills sighed. "Well, it's done now, and I suspect Caldwell will be leaving town shortly. He won't want to face the gossip or scrutiny." "He'll face more than gossip," Daniel predicted. "The marshal will want to question him directly now that his tactics have been exposed publicly." Eleanor listened to their discussion, content to remain silent as exhaustion from the morning's confrontation settled over her. When Daniel noticed her fatigue, he immediately excused them both. "Let's get you home," he said softly, guiding her to where their horses waited. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the autumn landscape stretching golden and vibrant around them. Eleanor felt a profound sense of both accomplishment and uncertainty. She had saved her land, but at what cost? Caldwell's threat lingered, and the awareness of the syndicate's reach suggested dangers yet to come. As they approached the ranch house, Daniel slowed his horse to ride alongside hers. "You were magnificent today," he said. "Few would have had the courage to stand up as you did." "I had help," Eleanor reminded him, offering a small smile. "You had support," Daniel corrected. "The courage was entirely yours." They dismounted in the yard, and Daniel took both sets of reins, his expression suddenly serious. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you," her heart constricted with sudden anxiety. "What is it?" The marshal has telegraphed orders. "Now that Caldwell has been publicly linked to the syndicate, we need to move quickly before evidence disappears. I've been instructed to join the task force in Santa Fe immediately." The news shouldn't have surprised her. Of course his duties would take him elsewhere, but Eleanor felt the loss acutely nonetheless. "I see," she said, struggling to maintain her composure. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Daniel replied, his blue eyes troubled. "I don't want to go especially now, but this investigation has been my assignment for over a year." Eleanor nodded, understanding duty all too well. "Of course, your work is important." Daniel stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Eleanor, last night what happened between us, it wasn't just because of the hearing or the danger. You must know that." "I do," she assured him softly. "These past weeks with you have changed me," he continued, his voice low and intense. "Your quiet strength, your determination, your kindness, they've shown me what really matters. I don't want to leave, but I need to finish what I started." Eleanor squeezed his hands gently. "I understand, Daniel, truly." He searched her face. "Do you?" "Because I need you to know that I intend to come back. As soon as this investigation is concluded, I want to return to you, if you'll have me." The sincerity in his eyes stole Eleanor's breath. For so long she had stood alone, convinced that solitude was her destiny. The possibility of a different future one shared with someone who truly saw and valued her seemed almost too fragile to trust. "What are you saying, Daniel?" she asked, needing absolute clarity. "I'm saying that I love you, Eleanor Dawson," he stated simply. "I love your strength, your quietness, your determination. I love the way you fight for what matters without compromising who you are. And if you'll give me the chance, I want to build a life with you right here on this land you fought so hard to keep." Eleanor felt tears gather in her eyes, but for once she didn't try to hide them. "I've never been good with words," she whispered. "You don't need to be," Daniel reminded her, bringing her hand to his lips. "Just tell me if there's hope for us." Eleanor stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't articulate: her fear, her hope, her newfound love for this man who had defended her quiet strength when others had mocked it. When they parted, she found her voice. "Come back to me, Daniel. I'll be waiting." The morning of Daniel's departure brought a crisp autumn chill that hinted at the coming winter. Eleanor stood beside his horse, memorizing his face as he made final preparations for the journey to Santa Fe. "I've asked Miguel and his nephew to stay at the house until I return," Daniel told her, tightening his saddle cinch. "And Sheriff Mills has promised to check on you regularly." Eleanor smiled at his protective instincts. "I managed 3 years on my own, Deputy. I suspect I can handle a few weeks." "I know you can," he acknowledged, returning her smile, "but humor me anyway." He mounted his horse and looked down at her, his expression softening. "I'll write when I can, though our locations may change as the investigation progresses." Eleanor nodded, maintaining her composure despite the ache in her chest. "Be careful, Daniel. Always," he promised. He leaned down from the saddle to kiss her one last time, a gentle promise of return. Then, with a final touch to his hat brim, he rode away, his figure gradually diminishing against the vast New Mexico landscape. Eleanor watched until he disappeared from view, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability before turning back to the ranch house. There was work to be done, and she would face it as she always had, with quiet determination and newfound hope. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm both familiar and strange. Eleanor continued the daily work of the ranch, appreciating Miguel's increased presence, but still handling most decisions herself. The difference now was the anticipation that colored her days, each morning bringing the possibility of a letter from Daniel, each evening spent writing to him by lamplight. His letters, when they came, were detailed and warm, describing the progress of the investigation without revealing sensitive information. The syndicate's operations were more extensive than initially believed, with connections to corrupt officials throughout the territory. Caldwell had indeed fled, but federal marshals were closing in on his location. Between the practical updates, Daniel included personal reflections that Eleanor treasured, observations about the landscapes he traveled, books he was reading, and always his thoughts about their future together. His words revealed a man both thoughtful and passionate, strengthening her conviction that what they had found in each other was rare and worth protecting. Eleanor's replies were briefer, but no less heartfelt. She shared the daily triumphs and challenges of the ranch, her plans for spring planting, and the gradual change in how the townspeople treated her. The mockery had ceased, replaced by a respectful acknowledgement of her capabilities. Several women had even approached her for advice on property matters, a remarkable shift in attitude. As autumn deepened into winter, Eleanor realized something profound had changed within her as well. Her quietness remained; it was fundamental to who she was, but the defensive shell she had built around herself had begun to soften. Having been truly seen and valued by Daniel, she found herself more willing to engage with others, to allow select people glimpses of the person behind the reserve. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Eleanor had just finished evening chores and was preparing a simple supper when she heard hoofbeats approaching through the muffled silence of the snow-covered landscape. Her heart leapt with hope, though she cautioned herself against disappointment. Daniel's last letter had indicated the investigation might continue through the new year. She moved to the window, straining to see through the gathering darkness. A lone rider approached, hunched against the cold. As he drew nearer, Eleanor recognized the broad shoulders and familiar posture that had become so dear to her. She flung open the door without pausing for a coat, hurrying into the yard as Daniel dismounted. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, snow swirling between them, each drinking in the sight of the other after months apart. Then Daniel opened his arms and Eleanor moved into his embrace, all her careful reserve forgotten in the joy of reunion. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, his breath warm against her neck. "You're here," she whispered, scarcely believing it. "I'm here," he confirmed, drawing back to look at her with eyes that reflected the same wonder she felt. "And I'm not leaving again." Inside, as Daniel warmed himself by the fire, he explained the unexpected conclusion of the investigation. "We arrested the syndicate's leaders 2 days ago, 12 men in total, including a territorial judge and the land commissioner." Caldwell turned state's evidence to save himself, providing documents that implicated the others. "So it's over?" Eleanor asked, serving him coffee and stew. "This phase is," Daniel confirmed. "There will be trials, testimony needed, but my part the investigation is complete." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I've resigned my commission, Eleanor." She stared at him, surprised. "But your career was important," he acknowledged. "But not as important as coming back to us, if you still want there to be an us." Eleanor's quiet laugh was full of joy. "I've never wanted anything more," she assured him. Daniel's expression grew serious as he reached into his pocket. "I've had a lot of time to think these past months about what matters most in life, about the future I want." He withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained, holding it up between them. "Eleanor Dawson, your quiet strength has been my guiding light through dark and difficult days. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor looked at the man before her, this remarkable person who had defended her when she was mocked, who had recognized her strength when others saw only oddity, who had given her the priceless gift of being truly known. "Yes," she said simply, her quiet voice carrying all the love and certainty she felt. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of understanding, respect, and abiding love. Spring came to Oro Grande in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. The Dawson Ranch, soon to be the Lowell Dawson Ranch, as Eleanor had insisted on honoring both their names, thrived under their combined care. Daniel's experience with cattle and Eleanor's knowledge of the land complemented each other perfectly, creating a partnership that extended beyond the personal to the practical. On a perfect May morning, with the mountains crisp against the blue sky, Eleanor stood on the porch of the home she had fought so hard to keep. She wore a simple white dress adorned with lace her mother had preserved for this day. Her hair fell in soft waves down her back, crowned with a circlet of wildflowers Miguel's wife had woven for her. Before her, a small gathering of people waited, not the entire town, but those few who had earned a place in her carefully guarded circle of trust. Mrs. Whitaker from the general store. The marshal who had overseen the syndicate investigation. Miguel and his family. A handful of neighboring ranchers who had supported her claim against Caldwell, and standing beneath an arch of spring blossoms, waiting for her with love shining in his eyes, was Daniel. As Eleanor walked toward him, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from mockery to respect, from solitude to partnership, from quiet endurance to quiet joy. Daniel took her hands in his as she reached him, his smile intimate and full of promise. "You are radiant," he whispered for her ears alone. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows simple and sincere. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel cupped Eleanor's face gently in his hands. "Your quiet strength is what I admire most about you," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Today and always." As their lips met in their first kiss as husband and wife, Eleanor knew that her father's legacy had been fulfilled in ways he could never have imagined. The land remained in caring hands, but more importantly, the strength he had instilled in her, the quiet, enduring power to stand firm in a noisy world, had finally been recognized for the gift it truly was. Epilogue: 5 years later, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Beside her, Daniel held their sleeping 2-year-old son, Jacob, named for her father. From the corral came the sound of their older daughter, Margaret, giggling as Miguel's son taught her to lasso a fence post. "She has your determination," Daniel observed, smiling at their 4-year-old's repeated efforts despite frequent misses. "And your inability to remain quiet about anything exciting," Eleanor countered with affectionate humor. Daniel laughed softly, careful not to wake their son. "A perfect blend of us both, then." The Lowell Dawson ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The aquifer beneath their land had indeed proved valuable, but rather than monopolizing it, they had established fair water sharing agreements with neighboring properties. Their innovative approach had become a model for the territory, earning them respect throughout the region. Daniel had found his calling as a rancher and part-time legal advisor to the territorial governor on water rights issues. His experience with the syndicate investigation had made him invaluable in drafting new regulations that protected small landowners. Eleanor had surprised herself by gradually taking a more public role in community affairs. Her quiet wisdom and practical approach to problems had earned her a place on the town council, the first woman to serve in such a capacity in Oro Grande's history. The same townspeople who had once mocked her reserve now sought her thoughtful counsel. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked, his free hand finding hers on the swing between them. Eleanor considered the question, her gaze sweeping across the land. She loved the thriving orchards they had planted, the healthy cattle grazing in the distance, the expanded house that rang with children's laughter. "None," she answered truthfully. "Though sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day in the store." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I'd have found another way to meet you properly. Some things are simply meant to be." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her completely. The quiet strength that had once been mocked had become her greatest asset, recognized, respected, and most precious of all, loved. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Eleanor Dawson Lowell knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not just in this land that had been her father's dream, but in the heart of the man who had declared her strength the thing he admired most.